Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 7th of September 2011. My name is Totalbiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email mailbox@cynicalbrit.com, that is mailbox@cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. The game in the background is Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. A few hours into the campaign this, I don't believe there's any spoilers, you shouldn't have to worry too much about that. It's not exactly a story-heavy game to begin with. Still enjoying it, by the way. Game is absolutely badass. Some people say, oh, well, it's shallow. In the grim darkness of the far future, ladies and gentlemen, there is only war, and that's exactly what there is in this game. First email comes in from Luke that says, Hi TB, I was wondering why we don't see many strategy games for consoles. Is it a lack of options that you can do on console compared to PC, or hardware capability to run them? But do developers see consoles' primary games as FPS, which they don't want to compete with? Well, it really comes down to a few things. It comes down to the fact that there is not a large strategy market that uses consoles as their primary platform. If you're big into strategies, chances are you play them on PC, so you've got a pretty niche demographic to market to there. Secondly, it comes down to controller restrictions. It's really hard to create an RTS that works properly with a controller because you simply cannot play competitive RTS on a console without a keyboard and mouse. So you can't play competitive RTS without a keyboard and mouse. It's really as simple as that. And when you try and create a competitive RTS that doesn't use a mouse, it's very limited in what you can do, and you don't really have too much of a multiplayer scene developing as a direct result of that. Now, there are methods in which you can create an RTS that will work, particularly, say, if you're going with a PlayStation Move. The Move is quite good in that regard, and, say, games like Ruse came out for PS3, and they did alright, but once again, you still can't be as quick in strategy games as you can be on a PC. I mean, you could never play StarCraft 2 on a PS3 with even a pad or a move or whatever. You just simply would not have the APM, the actions per minute required to play it effectively. So what you've got to do is release strategy games that don't really require high APM. Ruse is a prime example of that, and that is quite a slow RTS that's mostly based around deception and map control and things like that, and less around fast finger work. So that worked pretty well. It's not to say that there aren't strategy games. I mean, we get a lot of strategy RPGs, for instance. There's quite a lot of tactical battle and SRPGs that are released for console. In fact, more so than there are on PC, which is a little annoying, to say the least. I do quite like my tactics-based RPGs, and there aren't all that many coming for PC, and there's quite a few, particularly Japanese ones, for the consoles, and some of them are quite good, for instance. But what you're talking about really strategy-wise is full-on, and I do say full-on, real-time strategy. That is the genre that simply does not work. Turn-based? Absolutely. Turn-based works fine. There are some turn-based strategy games. By turn-based strategy, I do mean PC style as opposed to SRPG, turn-based RPGs, stuff like Disgaea and the Japanese RPGs, a lot of Atlas games, for instance. I am kind of surprised not to see a few more turn-based strategy games being released on the console under either Xbox Live Arcade or PSN. I think there's perhaps a market for that. There was a recent game released called Under Siege on the PS3, which is actually a strategy game that uses the PlayStation Move. So we could see more of that, but I don't really know how well that actually did. So it's a possibility they may make more like that. It's a possibility that they will not. I just think it comes down to developers not really having the guts to do it, and I think the venue for it is the $10 to $15 range in Xbox Live Arcade and PSN, not a full-priced shelf release. I don't see a full-price shelf release actually succeeding, not with the market in the current state that it's in. This one comes in from Jack Dark Flame that says, I was watching your Mailbox one day and you talked about publishers like EA and Activision fighting to be the most evil. Then I got to thinking, why do we need them? I love DICE, not EA. From what I've seen, publishers do nothing to help make the game, but they control things like per-purchase bonuses, which make people want to boycott the game. I may be wrong, but I would like to hear your thoughts. Also, I was looking at my SC2 and WoW boxes and I didn't see any other name besides Blizzard. So, Blizzard both publishes and develops their games themselves. Does that make them an indie developer? A very big one. No, it doesn't, because that's Activision Blizzard, and that's something you have to consider. They are both now the same company. Activision Blizzard is a publisher and a developer. And there are some companies that do that. There are plenty of internal studios that develop in-house and then get published by the larger company in general. But I think you're misunderstanding the role of a publisher here. The publisher provides a lot of logistical support as well as the financing required. DICE couldn't afford to make Battlefield 3 if they were on their own. This is something you've got to consider. That's a very, very expensive game. They have a very large staff. They're using cutting-edge technology. It is a very expensive game. And then, of course, in order to make that money back, you've got to have massive marketing. Think about the amount of money that's being invested in, say, something like, prime example, probably best example, the Old Republic. That is costing anywhere between $60 million and $200 million to develop, and bear in mind that those figures are not official. We know for a fact that it cost at least $80 million, but that was from an article back in March on Industry Gamers, and all of the other articles I can find on this matter are from freaking WordPress blogs, and you know what? I don't trust those. But whatever the case, it's a very, very expensive game, and BioWare could not afford to make it on their own. And then you've got to think about marketing, and marketing is perhaps the most important thing. The only way that they can afford to do that is because EA is confident the game will make its money back and is injecting a huge amount of budget also into marketing to ensure that that is the case. It doesn't matter if you have $80 million to spend on your game, if you then have no dollars left to market it. You cannot simply rely on pure viral marketing for everything, as much as I wish that you could. It's getting more and more viable to release games purely on that. Minecraft, for instance, had basically no marketing budget and continues to have basically no marketing budget, and yet is driven entirely by its success on YouTube. It's really as simple as that. You've got people like CNanners and then, of course, the Yogscast that drove huge amounts of sales and hundreds upon thousands, perhaps, of other Minecraft-based channels, and this all sprung up in a viral way, in a completely organic and natural way. Now, that doesn't really work for something big like the Old Republic. That's simply not how it's going to be, and they're putting a lot of marketing money into that. BioWare could not make the Old Republic without EA. Publishers are a very, very useful part, and indeed an essential part, at the moment, of the games industry. You cannot indie dev everything. If you do indie dev everything, and you self-fund everything, or you rely on donations, or indeed the success of previous games, then you will have, for a time, a lowering of fidelity. Graphics technology will regress. It's as simple as that. Because you cannot afford to have massive teams of artists, you cannot afford the latest equipment, you cannot afford to do what, say, they did with LA Noire, for instance, the facial capture. That stuff simply could not happen. And some people might want that, because perhaps it might force companies to go back to an earlier stage whereby game design was more important than graphical fidelity. But it still doesn't help all that much. Like it or not, pushing the envelope on graphics fidelity is one way to make gaming better, and it also pushes technology forward, which is important. So that is something to consider. Games are expensive to create, and honestly, you're not going to be seeing more indies, you're probably going to be seeing less of them as more developers look to create that big, true high-fidelity experience, particularly if they're going down the MMO side of things, which is ridiculously expensive to develop. So there will be more publishers, I would think, and not less, but I wouldn't go all out and say that publishers are evil, because it's really not the case. They are necessary to the current system. If anything, it's not the publishers that are the problem, it's the shareholders that cause all of this DRM nonsense, pre-order bonuses and things like that. When it comes to pre-order bonuses, you've also got to blame the retailers for pushing for it. You've got GameStop with so much marketing power, for instance, and Walmart that say, we want a pre-order bonus from you, and if you don't give it to us, then we simply won't stock your game. Or we will not market your game. We won't do a midnight release. We'll just buy a couple of copies, put them in the back. And until, of course, that breaks down, then you're going to have continued problems with pre-orders, but it looks like the pre-order nonsense will continue since Steam has jumped on board with it so much, and of course now other digital distribution platforms must do it in order to compete. So we have the same problem, only it's online this time, and you don't get anything physical. So I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's probably only going to get worse. This one comes in from Force Water that says, as you are aware, Blizzard has released the first wave of Diablo 3 beta keys. Now, it has come to my attention that many big names in the community have asked their fans for one of these keys. Obviously, it is completely up to the person who received the key whether or not to give it away. However, from the perspective of someone who did not get one, it seems a little unfair that someone should get this key simply because they are a prominent figure in the community. From a business perspective, however, it's hugely beneficial for the figure in question to receive one of these limited keys. If you bring out exclusive content of something as huge and widely anticipated as Diablo 3, then you're bound to get a whole lot of views, which in many cases leads to a lot of money. Your thoughts on the matter and on how the two sides balance out would be greatly appreciated. Well, here's my argument in favour of prominent figures getting access to these things, because they can share it with others. Random Joe Schmo gets access to Diablo 3. What does he do? Plays it. Does he share it with anybody? No. Does he create content based on it so that other people can enjoy it? No. Does he bring up important matters of discussion that the community can get their teeth into, so as perhaps to create a better gaming experience going through the beta? No. You want to know what he does? He plays it, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it is more beneficial to someone that has a large audience, for instance, to get a hold of a key so that they can entertain the rest of the audience. Because let's face it, chances are most of you are not getting into the Diablo 3 beta for quite some time. The vast majority of you, in fact. And yes, even popular figures, quote-unquote, are struggling to get access to the beta. Now, the first wave of beta keys, as far as I'm aware, has not gone out. The friends and family beta keys have gone out, which is entirely different. I'm actually being told that that beta is only an hour long and only consists of the first 20% of Act 1. So it's not really a huge deal if we can't show you that. I know for a fact that I cannot. If I get access to the Friends and Family beta, for instance, then as a media personality, I will not be able to share that because I'm not technically Friends and Family, and will either need media passes or simply access to the general beta. It's a bit of a hassle, but consider for a second what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that Cataclysm beta key and that had just gone to some random. Then you wouldn't have got all of that content. And I don't want to blow my own trumpet here, but at the end of the day, a lot of you watched that content and enjoyed it. So, to me, that seems like a more beneficial thing to do for the community in general. And for God's sake, that Worgen Starting Zone Area 1, I think, has, what, 2 million views, almost? Those are people that, for the most part, I would hope, actually enjoyed that video. That video would have never been created if I hadn't gotten a beta key. So, in fact, it does make more sense to give it to people who are willing to share it with others. In fact, those are the people, as far as I'm concerned, that should be prioritized. Yeah, absolutely, give out random keys to random people. Nothing wrong with that. You need a lot of people in your beta in order to properly shake it down, stress test it, and get a good cross-section of the community when it comes to balancing issues and things like that. But when it comes to things like publicity, as you said, from the business perspective, it makes more sense to give it out to people that actually have an audience. And from the community perspective as well, it makes more sense to do that. Because then, those who can't get into the beta can experience the beta by watching well-presented content given to you by prominent YouTubers and things like that. So that's my perspective on it. Needless to say, I'm highly biased. It makes perfect sense for me to be highly biased on the matter. Obviously, I think it's a good idea. I would want access to that beta. I should be getting access to that beta. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I don't know when that's going to be. It may be late, it may not be late. And obviously, from a business perspective for me, it makes sense to get content out faster than other people. Now, I started producing Cataclysm beta content, for instance, before anybody else did, and I was able to gain a large audience, which put me in a strong position going forward to be the biggest source of Cataclysm beta coverage on YouTube. So, obviously, everyone is scrambling to get there first, and some people are maybe getting into the Friends and Family beta and they're not able to actually stream it or provide video content, and they're thinking, well, is it worth the risk? It's always a bit of a pain when NDAs float around like that. You think, is it worth the risk? There are sites that have done it in the past, but generally speaking, if you are a large, prominent YouTuber, you cannot take the risk of breaking an NDA like that. So that is, once again, something to consider. But that's my thoughts on the matter. It does make sense for everybody, really, that the keys are given initially to highly prominent members of the community that have an audience, because then more people get to experience the beta at once without necessarily having to give keys to every single one of them. Whereas you give 200 keys to randoms, you might get a couple of poor quality streams and some screenshots and maybe a YouTube video that's not even properly aligned or is the wrong aspect ratio. Give it to people that do this for a living, professionally, and you will get good quality, watchable and enjoyable content from them. Okay, folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. I will hopefully be able to provide you with Mailbox tomorrow and the day after that as well. Sorry about yesterday. There's a lot of stressful things going on at the minute. Hopefully back on schedule. We shall see. I'll see you next time.